Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 156, Creating Jewish Theater. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And we are launching a series of episodes today that is a new experiment in the way that we do the podcast. It's a collaboration with the Council of American Jewish Museums, which is holding its conference in Los Angeles at the beginning of March. The topic of the conference is The Creative Challenge, Museums for the Next Generation, and it's going to be exploring the future of Jewish museums as places not only for reflecting and looking at the past, but also in some way sparking creativity about the future. The next 5 guests on Judaism Unbound are going to be, in one way or another, interested in and working in the area of creativity. We are going to be talking to people who are creating in all kinds of areas of human creation, ranging from theater to painting to novel writing to museums, and also Jewish living and practice. Our first 3 guests in this series are going to appear on stage with me on March 3rd for a panel conversation that's going to build off of the ideas that we have explored in our interviews and also apply them a little bit more to the world of Jewish museums. The audio from that panel discussion will be made available as a bonus episode of Judaism Unbound as soon as we can get it turned around, which we hope will be very soon after the panel actually happens on March 3rd. The other 2 guests in our series, unfortunately, won't be on the panel, but we think we'll be also rounding out this exploration in interesting ways, and we're really excited about the entire series. And we're really excited and grateful to the Council of American Jewish Museums for helping us put together this series, helping us find these wonderful guests, and for, in general, being excited about our work as we're excited about their work. The first guest in this series, our guest today, is Henne. He is a playwright and the artistic director of Theater Dybbuk in Los Angeles, California, but which travels to many other places to show their work. Theater Dybbuk is a theater company that creates provocative performances and innovative educational encounters that explore Jewish thoughts to illuminate universal human experience. We're going to talk with Aaron about their process of developing theater projects, about their goals, and how they think about the intersection between creativity and Judaism, and we're really excited to jump into this conversation. In addition to being the artistic director of Theater Dybbuk and a playwright in other venues, Henne teaches storytelling workshops throughout the country. He has designed and facilitated creative seminars for Lucasfilm, Pixar, and DreamWorks. He's been a faculty member of the Wexner Heritage Program and has consulted to a wide variety of Jewish organizations. Henne, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So can we start by just understanding a little bit about Theater Dybbuk and how it got started and what it's all about?
Sure. The background is I was a longtime theater artist, writer, director, educator, and I started to notice that I was getting a lot of ideas connected to Jewish history in my theatrical work. And then being based in Los Angeles, I looked around the Los Angeles landscape, the second largest Jewish population in the United States, and recognized that there was this interesting gap of kind of experimental theatrical work from a Jewish perspective. And I thought, well, if that's something I would like, I bet others would as well. Hoping I was right. Who knew? And so where that went was over the years, Theater Dybbuk became a kind of holistic arts and education organization. So we work in 3 major ways. We create large-scale theatrical works based on Jewish history and folklore and ritual that involve dance and spoken word and stylized movement and live music. And we actually develop all of those pieces over a period of 6 months to 2.5 years per project. We also do educational work, everyone from direct services to students in religious schools and such, all the way up to utilizing theatrical and storytelling techniques for Jewish leadership with organizations across North America. Then we also do community engagement events where we use, again, story and theater to kind of unpack themes connected to Jewish life, and so that the people in a community can hear the other voices in their community in a new way, and we can all kind of center around a Jewish experience. So those are kind of our three approaches to engagement, with the theatrical approach, the shows being kind of the center pillar and the other two being part of the stool. And our theatrical work is actually purposely giving the audience more than they can handle. In other words, we are offering an experience where there is stylized movement, often very dance-like, with live music, with extremely dense, often highly intellectual text. And so if you think about Jewish prayer, a colleague of mine once said that the Jewish prayer experience, some spiritual experiences, for example, in the Buddhist tradition, are often about emptying the bag. And the Jewish prayer experience is about filling the bag until it's bursting. And I think our theatrical work works in a similar manner. And I think a great example of our work and how it operates is in 2016, we had a work called Exegog. It was based on the first recorded Jewish play, 2nd century BCE in Alexandria. A diaspora Jew wrote our biblical Exodus narrative in the style of the time, meaning Greek tragedy. And we have only fragments of it, maybe a fifth of it, 269 lines. And so Theater Dybbuk utilized those fragments to create a whole theatrical work by filling in the gaps with new material and by incorporating modern day narratives of refugees, immigrants, and those who have been disenfranchised in American society. So we are utilizing Jewish history to look at our world today.
I love that you brought up Exegog and like Greek theatrical productions. I think that's like a really interesting and cool space for us to start in. I was thinking about, strangely enough, like bards and the whole practice of telling stories through singing. And it was sort of, from my understanding, I don't actually know that much about like classical Greek history, but my sense is that the way that folks in this culture often sort of taught one another and were inculcated with a variety of stories was through singing, through theatrical performance. And what I like about how you introduced Theater Dybbuk is that I go to movies, and often my favorite movies are the ones that critics pan because they say they couldn't decide on a genre. And I feel like what you just described is like, well, are you an education organization? Are you an arts organization? Are you a Jewish ritual organization? Are you, like, I feel like the answer to any of those is both no and yes. And so I'm intrigued by that. And I guess what I'm getting at is I'd love to hear from you, like, why? Like, why go about... So you could do education a more traditional kind of way in a classroom. You could do art you could just do sort of straightforward art. You could do straightforward Jewish ritual. I remember reading when I was researching about you for this episode that you were thinking about like being a rabbi. You could have gone and been a rabbi and done that. Like, why is it that you did this genre bending, genre combining thing of taking art and Jewish ritual and education and blurring them all together? And I guess like what does it look like and why is it valuable?
The first thing I want to address in your question is first, I can talk about religious ritual and theater and artistic expression. And, if we go back to the ancient Greeks, what we think of today as plays, we think of Oedipus, we think of, those writers, Sophocles, Euripides, were actually ritual, religious, spiritual experiences. And they may have taken the form of play, of theater, but they were there functioning much in the way a prayer service might. They are bringing people together around a communal experience in order to transcend their earthly state and reach something higher. And so I think that if we think about artistic work and theatrical work from that perspective, that it is aligned with a great history of transcendence, of spiritual exploration, both communally and individually, I think we are right in line with that history. We are kind of on that trajectory. And in terms of thinking about Theater Dybbuk as an arts and education organization that also engages in ritual, I understand that we do many things. And actually, we've had this where sometimes people struggle to kind of wrap their heads around what Theater Dybbuk is and how it operates. we have false boundaries between education, ritual, theater, art. Our society is set up to see these as separate engagements. Our schools are set up this way, right? Math is not art. Art is not math, when in fact, they are completely intertwined and intersected. Science is creative, and yet we put science over here. We make drama an elective. This is insane. They are all part of one conversation. Our shows are infused with historical perspective and are based on historical perspective and infused with scholarship. So education is happening inside of our shows. There is no doubt education is happening for the makers and for the participants and for the audience. Ritual has our history baked inside of it. Our rituals are based on thousands of years of an accumulation of things we've been doing for a variety of reasons. So therefore, when you are engaging in ritual, you are being educated about our history, and you are being educated about where we're headed, and you are also participating in an artistic creative endeavor. You are singing music. You are speaking poetry. Of course, our prayer experience is filled with poetry. A rabbi mentor friend of mine pointed out that our Siddur is an art museum. We didn't make visual art. What we created were works that were portable and that we could take with us. So these false boundaries are keeping us back from embracing the whole holistic nature of our tradition and of our humanity.
How does an artist, whether they're also trying to be an educator or a ritualist or whatever, how do you come to a well of material? I was really intrigued by your description of Judaism as kind of overfull compared to Buddhism, which values the stripping down. But that there's something that an artist is doing when an artist approaches all of that material, which is different from just presenting it all without an editorial comment, right? There's a move that an artist makes when you go to the well of history and then try to create something in the present with it. And I'm wondering what the mechanism of that is and how you think about doing that.
So first, I just want to offer a clarification of something, because I'm always sensitive to these things. One is to say that one perspective on the Buddhist versus Jewish ritual experience is that the emptying out or the filling up. I also want to say that I recognize there is a myriad number of Buddhist experiences that look different than that, and there are a myriad number of Jewish experiences that look different from that. The first thing I want to offer around artistic engagement, Dan, you said something that I think is very important, which is I also want to be an advocate for the inherent value of art in forwarding a cultural conversation and in forwarding a human conversation. That we tend to value education in that box I just talked about it not being in. We tend to value ritual in that box I just talked about it not being in. And we think of art as an add-on, as something that is lovely if it's there, but is not necessary and may not have as high a value, right? This shows up in our funding. This shows up in the ways in which we speak about things, both in American society and largely in our Jewish worlds. And I just want to say that part of the reason I say the boundaries don't exist is that's also a way of saying that art in and of itself has educational value and ritual value inside of it. It in and of itself creates an experience that moves people forward to something outside themselves, greater than themselves, so that they can transcend their material and immediate concerns to commune with something larger, be it something eternal, or be it something that literally is an ever-widening circle, that I am looking to those around me and seeing what their needs are. Art is very good at empathy, and it is very good at perspective. I wish we were having more conversations about the inherent value of art to move us forward and the way in which that makes us richer people, rather than worrying about the immediate, does it add to Jewish continuity? Rather than having that conversation, does it make us richer as a human race? If the answer is yes, then we need to value it at the same level as we value other things, if not higher in some cases. Art can also have the function of agitating, meaning it is often, especially at times of strife or political difficulty, art can often have the purpose of saying, we believe this is right and we are standing up for it, and we are using art to kind of send a message to the world at large or to our community. It is meant to rally or to push against. I think what art can be very good at, I talked about joyful celebration and bringing together, but I actually, and this is where theater Dybbuk comes in, I actually think looking at our darkness is a key way to actually forward us as a world and to forward us as a Jewish community. Our biblical and post-biblical narratives are filled with difficulty and challenge. They're filled with things we might not be proud of, and they're filled with politics. We could have a whole conversation about how there's an argument to be made that our biblical history is essentially a political one that has all sorts of reasons for being developed and told in the way it is. And if we can actually, through art, look at that history and provide little glimpses of illumination into the darkness, we can walk forward as a community in saying, this tradition honors the fullness of my humanity because it in and of itself is full. It is not one level, it is 12 levels. It is an infinite number of levels. And so I think art is good at allowing those levels and those layers to peel and unpeel in a way that can allow us to feel closer to our tradition, not further.
I want to underscore this beautiful point you made about art as instrumental versus art as inherently valuable. I think it's really crucial. And I want to look back selfishly, as one does, on my own life experience. When I think about high school and my own classes, the hilarious or maybe not hilarious thing is that the class I can point to that is most practically of utility to me in my career right now is a once a week elective class I took for one semester as a senior in high school called music technology, where I learned how to very, very basics of editing music and some recording things. And here I am. Look, I am on a podcast and I edit said podcast and I use programs that I first learned about when I was in this music tech class. But and it's funny, I bring that up to people, but I'm always very careful to say, look, the reason that class was worthwhile is not that I'm now using it. It's good that I'm now using that class and have a practical purpose for it in my life. But actually, it was just a good thing that as a high schooler, I was opened up to a world of music and through a different lens than I had been. I mean, I was the band geek. I played clarinet. I grew up playing piano. I already loved music and connected to it. And this was sort of a next step, really awesome opportunity. And there were only 8 of us in the class. From the school's perspective, I think they might have even eliminated it shortly after because there weren't enough students in it. I'm not totally sure. Which once again brings up questions about how we value success. Is it by how many people take the class? But basically, I bring that up because I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, which is that art is constantly couched in this utilitarian, it helps us achieve X, Y, or Z practical, whether it's an economic goal or it's a political goal or it's a whatever. And we got to be able to back out and be yo, we're humans and we need this realm of things we call art. It's just bottom line. It's not good because it helps us do other stuff. It's good in and of itself. So thank you for that. And I guess on that front, I wanted to open up what we haven't quite done yet, which is sort of get to the process of how your art comes to be. How does a play how does a theater Dybbuk production come together from there's this cool Jewish ritual, or there's X, Y, or Z, and we want to package it in a way that will be beautiful. And what does it look like to go from some interesting Jewish ritual to an artistic piece, for lack of a better term?
I love, Lex, what you said about utilitarianism, and that I think for all of humanity, art makes us richer and more aware of ourselves and more aware of others. And I think for the Jewish community, it has the potential to make us more aware of our history and therefore more aware of the fault lines and the intersections within our own smaller communities and our more global community as well. So in terms of Jewish experience, I also wanted to align that it is not utilitarian, but it actually does have impact. And we can speak about impact without it being about, and I got this direct thing. And I think sometimes artists, and I had to learn this, had to come to understand that part of my job, if I do want funding support and buy-in, I do have to be able to speak about impact. It's just that impact may be different than and I took this exact thing away and now I'm using it. So here's how developing a theater Dybbuk piece works. I will, as artistic director and artistic lead, I will get interested in something. Sometimes it's because I've read something and I go, oh, that's fascinating. Sometimes it's because a colleague comes to me and says, I think this might be of interest to you. I write a 2 to 4 page document that says the basic idea for the show. We then choose a rough time when the show will open. Oh, it's February of 2016. We're looking to open in April of 2017. So we choose a rough time, and we then go about casting the work. And we have an ensemble. We have a core group of actors as well as composer, choreographer, sound designer who are part of the team. And so from that ensemble, we start to figure out who's the team for this particular project, how many actors, what are the musical needs, that kind of thing. So once we get those basics down, we start a script development process. I start bringing in script pages, and the group starts responding to those script pages. It is, trying not to be cliche, but there is something a little Talmudic about it. We have a source idea we're kind of centering around, and then around that is more text and discussion, and around that is more text and discussion. And we are also 2 to 3 times a month doing physical development workshops where we are getting on our feet and building ensemble and playing with physical vocabulary, because half the vocabulary in the final production is physical. So we're wanting to build ensemble and make sure we're on the same page and understanding each other's physical boundaries and capabilities and experimenting with technique. We then, after that roughly year-long process, we go into a usually 2 to 4 week development period where we're on our feet. It looks and feels a lot like rehearsals, but we are really changing things, and I'm finding what's working in the text and what's not working. Then after those 3 to 4 weeks, we go into a more standard 4 to 5 week rehearsal process where we are rehearsing 20 to 30 hours a week, getting a show ready for production. And then we do the show. Almost never have we done our shows in a theater. We do our shows collaborating with venues and partners that their missions and their interests are intersecting with ours, and we can really utilize the space as a way of unpacking what's in the work. So, for example, our 2018 show, Lost Tribes, which utilized the Lost Tribes of Israel as an entry point to look at race and identity in America. And so it became clear we wanted to perform this work in spaces that present art. So, for example, we opened it at LA Contemporary Exhibitions, which is a large art gallery. And we took over the gallery and even put the actors on display with little placards telling about their family history and little iPods where you could listen to iPods about their family history as they stood there behind rope. And that is how we started the show, so that we were using the space as a way of telling the story as much as the text and the physical vocabulary itself.
I found it interesting earlier when you spoke about how the Siddur was an art museum, and that was one piece. Now we're hearing about how you set a theater Dybbuk production in an art gallery, and I want to keep rolling with that. Because we're in a block of episodes where we're sort of culminating in a museum panel, but you talked about the Siddur as an art museum, and that was clearly with a positive connotation. You were talking about, wow, like this Siddur, this prayer book, is full of incredible. It's a cool way of preserving various eras of the Jewish past, et cetera, in the way that an art museum preserves various eras of artistic. I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's the implication I was understanding from you. And I think it's interesting because so often because I hear people talk about X Jewish thing or Y Jewish thing as like a museum, but usually it's derogatorily. Usually it's not a good thing. It's saying, oh my gosh, like we're being like a museum right now. We're just trying to like preserve the past, and we're not willing to look forward. That kind of understanding of a museum where it's just where relics live. I'm trying to find all the negatively connoted words: relic of the past, antiquated, all like whatever words like that we can think of. That's what I think people are getting at sometimes when they bring up, oh, the prayer book, it's like a museum. But tell me more of what you're getting at, because clearly you're somebody who views whether it's art museums or other kinds of museums as really important contributors to our society. So what were you getting at there, and what can how do museums link into the kind of work that you're doing?
We often think of preservation either in a very positive context, a connotation of we're preserving something that is going away. We think about this with environmental conservation and think of that as a kind of preservation. And Lex, as you pointed out, we also think about it in a negative connotation. We are preserving something instead of looking forward, instead of engaging. We are merely holding space for something that once existed and may or may not have value anymore. And I think, so one is just to say preservation in and of itself, I actually do think has value in that we are tied to history. We are a product of history. We are a product of where we've been and the politics and interpersonal and communal conversations and difficulties and challenges that are happening at any given time. And I think museums can be excellent holders of that history. They can give us places to go and be reminded of what has come before, and therefore what might be repeated, both fortunately or unfortunately. They held great lessons in them. So I think that is of immense value. Two, as an artist, I think the museum space is, you potentially have everything you need to create. This notion of the genius artist who creates something whole cloth out of nothingness is a false notion that I think has hurt art, has hurt our communal conversation and societal conversation around art, because we hold it up as a genius experience that is not in a trajectory with anything else, that only those who are so talented and so qualified can create things of that kind of high value. Museums instead tell us that there is a whole history from which to pull and respond to that is both artistic and is filled with other kinds of knowledge that we can then jump off from and create from in conversation with, because every piece of art is in conversation with its past and is in conversation with its future, and a museum just makes that apparent. It just says, here it is for you to grab hold of and look at our world today and look at yourself and look at those around you.
I mean, it strikes me, connected to what you were saying earlier about how we make false distinctions between various parts of life, education and art, etc. It makes me wonder, like, what a museum would look like that was also a theater, right? Or that that meaning that was built into the very fabric of it. Because when you said that the prayer book was like a museum, I also had that kind of a little bit of that negative sense of, oh, now I understand why I don't really love the prayer book so much. But I actually love museums, so I was trying to like figure out what was it that I was reacting to in that, and I think that what I was reacting to was perhaps in a way the difference that my wife and I experience when we go to a museum. And actually in this telling, I'm the one who's wrong in the sense that I walk through the museum and I want to read every panel there, and I want to really kind of make sure that I'm getting everything out of this experience that I'm supposed to, whereas my wife tends to walk through it more quickly and just kind of look at what's interesting to her. And I kind of have a negative reaction to that, saying, like, we're only going to be here once, we should really pull everything out of it that we can. But on reflection, I think she's actually got the better approach. And I think that what I'm reacting to is that we seem to access the prayer book traditionally the way that I tend to access museums, which is maybe okay if you're only going to do it once a year, but it's pretty exhausting if you're going to do it every week.
Theatrical experience is, I think, much like the experience people have as walking through a museum, where one partner might engage with every piece of writing, every piece of curation, every piece of knowledge, and another might let it wash over them as a kind of experience. And I actually think if good theatrical work, for example, and I think the theatrical work Theater Dybbuk does works exactly that way. Some people spend the entire show trying to unpack what they're hearing and trying to unpack every monologue and understand it and where is it in history. And others leave going, I don't know what I just experienced, but I was hit by flashes of things. And those flashes and shards, when I start to put them together, leave me with some kind of emotional picture and some kind of historical picture. Neither of these are of greater or lesser value. And I think what good museums do, as well as what good art does, is it allows you to have either of those experiences where you can dive deep or you can kind of walk through and take what you will. There is value to the art and to the museums that say, come and have a light experience, walk through. It doesn't require a lot of you, but you're taking something in. It is pleasant, accessible, and leaves you feeling like you had a nice meal that will stay in your stomach a little bit and you will recall the taste. And then some museums and some pieces of art, and I think Theater Dybbuk do this, ask you to work. They say, you are a participant, and unless you bring your whole self, you will leave here unsatisfied. And I think we are in a moment in our society where we are uncomfortable with that. We want everyone to say, that was great, I loved it, I had a good experience, instead of saying, I was provoked, I was scared, I was angry, there was more than I could possibly take in, and I felt hungry the entire time because I'd have a bite and I wanted more, but I couldn't take it all in, I couldn't process it all. I think in this moment of easy digestion, asking people to work to take in, to work to digest, to work to process has value. And I think good museums and good pieces of art can serve that purpose.
I'm really excited to look at one production of yours in particular. And it's this deep dive you did into a ritual that I don't know that many people are familiar with, Hakhail, which I'll let you describe what exactly that is. I don't want to spoil. But basically, I'm really intrigued on two fronts. One, I am excited at the potential of art to unlock pieces of the Jewish past that possess incredible power, but that for whatever reason are not front of mind for us now, but could be if they were sort of rejuvenated or inspired through artistic meaning. So that's one piece. But the other is like the specifics of Hakhail, which was this like cool gathering of sorts. And so I'm curious like about the model of, let's find a cool ignored part of the Jewish past. What can we do with that? Maybe it'll resonate today. And also like, what was it about this particular ritual gathering that made you want to look at it and explore it through art?
Lex, I am with you on that. There are so many rituals and so many bits of history, both hidden and known widely, I should say, because somebody knows them. They're not totally hidden, that are available to us, and we are poorer for not recognizing that, for wanting to return to the same exact well again and again. And don't get me wrong, part of ritual is repetition and saying this is what's lasted and this is what keeps being revisited. But I think part of history is saying there's stuff there that has value, and our job is to unpack it and discover why it once held value and how it might hold value once again. Theater Dybbuk was very fortunate. We had a partnership with the Leach-Tag Foundation and the San Diego JCC Center for Jewish Culture to create a work for their Sukkot Harvest Festival in 2015. They've in the past had sukkahs built. They had a sukkah building contest. The year we were there, they actually partnered with an architectural school to design a sukkah. And so we got to talking with them. And it became apparent that doing some kind of performative ritual experience would really be an interesting way to engage the public around this Sukkot holiday. It was the Shemitah year, the year of letting the land lie fallow, and Hakhail is this ritual that everyone would go to Jerusalem and hear some readings. I think it was largely from Deuteronomy, and they would gather there to as a community begin again. to let go of the past and move forward into the future. And they would hear readings from our tradition and proclamations. And so here we are, the men, women, children, people of all stripes and all ages gathering in one space to listen to something from our tradition and then to walk forward with that, infusing our activities for the coming year, the coming 7 years until the next Shemitah. When the folks at Bleach Tag Foundation and I and my team got to talking, it became apparent that this Hakel ritual had a kind of structure that we could borrow from. So when you talk about thinking about these rituals that are maybe hidden or unrealized or haven't been unpacked in recent years, this is a great example where we did almost nothing that was the exact contents of the original ritual. What we did, though, was take the essence of people of all ages gathering to have an experience. We took the structure of the readings that the community would hear and said, what is the structure of these readings? You go on this emotional trajectory. Here are the steps of these readings. So we actually structured the performance so it followed the emotional steps of the original ritual. And I think that's something that art can bring. It can say, what is the underlying truth? Why is something structured this way? Why is it formed this way? And how can we use that form to speak to our world and our needs in this moment in time?
Well, I was also intrigued by one of your productions that I just saw the basic name and description of on your website. And so I'm interested in partly your motivation in taking it on and partly what it was. Specifically, one of your productions was Lost Tribes, and you looked at the 10 Lost Tribes, the story of the 10 Lost Tribes, which, for those who don't know, was there were two in the biblical times. There were two Israelite kingdoms. One was called Israel in the north, one was called Judah in the south, and the kingdom of Israel in the north was destroyed about 150 years before the kingdom of the south, and so much of what we have received down the line as Judaism came from that southern kingdom that was destroyed later, that made it an extra 150 years. And for me, as somebody who's struggling with some of that stuff that we've received, it was kind of liberating to imagine this other alternative path, the way that it could have gone or the way that it might have been. And I actually ended up translating an Israeli novel about the Northern Kingdom, in part because I was trying to grasp at this other possibility, and when I learned from biblical historians that there were a lot of refugees from the Northern Kingdom that came to live in the Southern Kingdom, I could sort of imagine that maybe I was a descendant of those folks, and that there was a story, a lost story, in addition to the Lost Tribes, that was a true and authentic Jewish story that we might be able to bring back into our world today. So that for me was the motivation. I'm curious what it was for you to take on a topic like that and where you went with it.
I was interested in, first I thought I was interested in hidden narratives. I thought I was interested in this idea of, Dan, what you said, that there are these narratives from a whole other intersecting tradition, the Northern Kingdom, that may have been lost or subsumed by the dominating narrative of the Southern Kingdom of Judah. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, right, that we live in a world, especially, frankly, look, the work gets political. We live in a world, so I'm going to be overt about it, where there are forces trying to say that there is a history we have and that history we should return to and embrace once again. And it is a demolition of the complex histories that are contained within our dominant narrative. And I thought, well, the 10 tribes of Israel may be an entry point to have that conversation. How are we forming our great mythology by crushing or devaluing the narratives that don't fit into that overarching mythology? This is a complex subject, and there are a lot of fault lines, there are a lot of sensitivities. I am aware that as a male who is perceived a certain way in our society, I'm aware of the kind of privileges and power I may have. And so writing about a subject about narratives that are hidden and are being dominated is sensitive. And am I honoring the right voices? Am I putting my own perspective in a way that is actually supporting the problematic nature of telling this kind of narrative rather than subverting it. And to tell you how the piece started, because I think this, Dan, gets at what you're talking about. The piece began with actors on display, and the audience walked in to a lobby space, felt like a museum lobby or a gallery lobby, and actors were on display behind ropes with narratives from their lives on the wall, and you could hear them tell their personal stories. And in a way, I thought of this as the Northern Kingdom, this diverse group of people who actually are from different backgrounds and have different perspectives all in one space. And then we all got funneled into the main playing space, which I kind of thought of as the Southern Kingdom and or America. And we then had a 20 to 25 minute monologue from a quote unquote leader who was telling all these refugees from the North their quote unquote actual history. And we were witnessing a Jewish leader, essentially Judah, the head of Judah, not actual Judah, because this is many, many years after, but the head of the South telling these people of diverse backgrounds that they had a shared history. We were witnessing the birth of our Torah narrative as a political act.
Now I want to know what happened.
I can tell you, the piece then went on a huge trajectory through history. We watched a version of the birth of Christianity. We watched a version of the birth of Islam. We then went to 1492 and the expulsion, and we moved the whole piece from that part of the world to, across the Atlantic, etc., to what is now North America. And we moved the piece here as a way of looking how this trajectory of telling stories of dominance continues today, and how we are in a moment of these narratives that have been marginalized rising up and saying, here I am, this is my narrative. And how are we facing that as a community? And are we back in a moment of leadership trying to say, nope, let me tell you a story?
What I'm hearing in between the lines of what you're saying is you're not trying to avoid the political. So I guess what I'm getting at is sort of, there's the practical piece, like, okay, so what does it look like? How do you do the work of blurring political and artistic? And also there's the analytical or bigger picture piece, like, why do we need this? Like what does society gain by having a lens on the political that is not just the news or, wherever we're used to engaging with politics?
Politics, we have begun to, I shouldn't say begun, we have, with politics, put it much like education, ritual arts, in its own realm, as though it is separate from our everyday activities and the ways in which we walk through the world and the things we see and the things we process. It's all aligned. It's all one thing. That my understanding of this world is based in my education growing up in Bayonne, New Jersey, and what I was taught in public school there, and is based in X, Y, and Z, which is all about politics. What decisions were made in the halls of power? Where did funding go? What mythologies did we decide were true and which ones were not important to hear or were false? Everything about who I am is infused with political decisions. And I would make that argument for virtually everyone in most societies that is the case. So I think that to ignore that would be a dereliction of duties on my part as an artist. And as a Jewish artistic leader who has learned from our tradition that I have moral responsibility in this world. Now, how that looks, often people hear that and they think that what I must mean is that we are creating propaganda. Something that has a political, quote unquote, message that you are going to take with you and walk into the world and do something specific with it. That is a kind of theater that is actually not the theater we are making. The theater we are making is trying to say to the audience, this is complex and there are forces at play that you may or may not be processing. Process them. What you do with that information is none of my business, but the fact that you have that information may have you walk through the world in a different manner. And I may have opinions of, if you have that information, you'll probably go one direction rather than the other, but it's not my job to say that.
I'm curious, following up on this, if you could speak a little bit more about the relationship between creativity and conservation, because I'm thinking about how you could say that somebody coming to synagogue services should also walk out saying, I have a lot to think about. And yet, I think often or rarely is that the experience. And I guess I wonder whether part of the reason why that is so is because there hasn't been enough work in terms of the ongoing creativity of the experience. And the synagogue service is just one example of your standard Jewish experiences. And it's interesting to me in this conversation to both look at it from the perspective of the intra-Jewish conversation. You know, it makes me feel more excited about a Judaism that would be more interesting to me to imagine that we descended from the 10 lost tribes. But also where you're going with it is to say, but what's the point of any of it if it's not connected to the issues in the larger society in which we're living and to the values that we're trying to live or provoke or think about. And so it feels like there's something here that I'm struggling to fully articulate between, let's say, the staleness of something that's just a museum in that definition of that more negative approach, or let's say the person walking through the museum like me in the sort of way that doesn't fully register the excitement if you feel this obligation to read every description, versus I think that in the best of theater experiences, at least in my experience, this sense that you walk out having had a transformational experience, feeling sort of enlivened or just sort of completely sensate. And I guess I'm wondering if there's a way in which we can imagine a new relationship between creativity and conservation in the Jewish world and the museum world that would somehow strike that balance in a more in the best possible way.
The connection between creativity and conservation, I think one thing is to allow ourselves to risk productive discomfort. I think that people want to be challenged more than we, maybe as a Jewish community, as a society at large as well, think they want. That people are actually moved when they are asked to give something of themselves, be it their attention, be it their intellect, be it their emotional life, be it their vulnerability. They actually feel ownership over when they have to sacrifice something. Conservation is attached to a mindfulness and awareness around what are you asking of your partner. And the attendee, the congregant, the person walking into the museum is a partner, not merely an audience member, not merely, they are a collaborator. And I wonder where museums and where synagogues can think about that they can think about a reciprocal relationship as opposed to merely a service delivery relationship. And it may not actually change all that much the actions, but it'll change the perspective and what's therefore inside those actions. And people sense that. They have an inherent notion of what is being asked of them, and they participate differently when that intention is clear. Creativity is one of the means to unpack that and to unlock it.
Well, thank you, Aaron Henne, for joining us. Something in the last few minutes triggered this in me, but I feel the need to make up like a fake etymology. It's actually a strong Jewish tradition to pretend that words that aren't related by the book are related, so I'm going to do that. I don't know anything about Greek, but we've talked a lot today about museums on the one hand and creativity on the other, and we've done, I think, some intentional work to blur to make us think how the two actually interact in other ways. And I want to propose that museum is built truly or less truly on the idea of a muse, of a creative muse. And I'm going to pose that etymology. I have no idea if it's really there.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Thank you for bringing this conversation to us and helping us unpack, as you said, everything from museums to creativity to Jewish ritual to the ways in which they're all one.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate it.
And thanks as well, of course, to all of you out there listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope you'll tune into the rest of our episodes on creativity / museums / how they're the same. All those themes that came up today are gonna loom large in the coming episodes. Stick with us for them. We want to close out this episode in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us, and there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can head to our Twitter feed at Judaism Unbound. Third, you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. And last but not least, you can always hit us up via email at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we really, really like to make, because we so deeply appreciate it, is that if you are able to set aside any amount of monetary donation, we greatly appreciate that. And you can go about doing that at judaismunbound.com/donate with either a monthly recurring gift or a one-time donation. So thanks so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.